To be honest with you, I kind of figured this question was going to come up at some point.
And you said perhaps Canada should think the unthinkable, get some kind of domestic nuclear weapon capability.
He's not joking when he says, think the unthinkable. Imagine, Canada is considering building a nuke. Imagine this, Canadians are actually thinking about renewing their nuclear program because of the USA. How do you even comprehend that?
Dystopias have only gotten more popular over time. This could be because the stories they tell and the worlds they explore seem increasingly similar to our own.
So first things first, most Canadian leaders have been very consistent with one term. Nothing is off the table. So there was a conversation that was being had about Canada renewing their nuclear program, or whether they should build one or not, or at least have the equipment ready, just in case. So the conversation that was being had was because of an opinion piece. It was written in the Globe and Mail by Jean-François Bélanger. Canada needs to develop its own nuclear program. So here's the conversation they had afterwards.
Here is a military analyst who thinks this country should consider going a lot further and explore the purchase or the building of nuclear weapons, a domestic nuclear arms capability. We're joined by Canadian Jean-François Bélanger, who is now an assistant professor of military operations at the Royal Danish Defence College. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You wrote this striking op-ed in the Globe and Mail, and you said perhaps Canada should think the unthinkable, get some kind of domestic nuclear weapon capability.
Well, yeah, so I think the piece is part of the broader security concerns that have been arising, and you would expect years, but past couple of weeks and months as the Americans are restructuring their security outlooks.
Everything was going fine, and now it's just, I don't understand why. To not reach for my phone, not wait for a message that isn't coming.
Knowing that no matter how much I love you, it's not enough to make you stay.
But the piece, at least the idea behind the piece, is to bring Canadians and Canada, myself included, into thinking about hard and difficult questions. Mm-hmm. What does it mean when our number one ally, in the first place, decouples from European security and also mentions that they're tired of paying for Canadian security collaboration, and on the other hand, threatens annexation over time. And what the piece, and what I argue in the piece, it's not necessarily for now developing a nuclear capability, but at least shoring up what we call our nuclear latency, meaning bringing our capacity to develop one to the point where if we are in need and if we decide as a nation, and we can talk about the trade-offs of doing this, we'll be ready to go if that's the decision that we make.
Okay, so basically what he's saying is that they want to have all the equipment ready just in case the occasion arises where they actually need one, because you'd rather have it and don't need it than need it and don't have it. Okay, so a few things actually take into consideration before we go any further. It was a little bit of an eye-opener when you heard Chrystia Freeland talking about this, but this is not a new talking point.
The U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. I've been foreign minister. I know how to do that. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat.
So you heard the word she used, predator. I can guarantee you she's not the only one that feels that way. So just a little bit of information I want to provide you with to build some context to why this is significant. Canada and Canadians, for the most part, have always been known as that peaceful nation with teeth that they don't bear.
I enjoy mathematics. I enjoy calculating things. So I make a living doing science.
But specific to their nuclear program, their choice for disarmament is based on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, where they say Canada seeks to halt the spread of nuclear weapons, reduce existing stockpiles, and irreversibly eliminate them. In fact, Canada helped develop nuclear weapons during the Second World War. Canada also operated nuclear weapons during the Cold War, and the Canadian forces were equipped with nuclear warheads from 1964 to 1984. Although, to be fair, they've never tested one or used one. And because they were members of NATO and America's directly to the south, and America has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, they've always existed underneath the American umbrella. So Canada doesn't want nukes existing around the world, hence the treaty. But when your umbrella no longer protects you from the rain, all bets are off.
Talk about the trade-offs of doing this. We'll be ready to go if that's the decision that we make.
One thing we'd need, presumably, would be highly concentrated uranium isotope. We'd need to build the centrifuges, for example, for purifying uranium. So that would be costly.
Okay, so you heard one of the things that they said they would need.
One thing we'd need, presumably, would be highly concentrated uranium isotope. We'd need to build the centrifuges, for example, for purifying uranium. So that would be costly.
So you hear that, and then you take a look at this list. Look who's topping the charts. So hopefully that 51st day comment is starting to make a lot of sense now.
Yeah, so it would be costly, but in our case, especially if speed of the essence, the idea would be to go the plutonium route, mostly because it's faster and because what we need to buy is more restrained. We would need reprocessing facilities, and those are dual use. And I think it's also written into a larger question about nuclear energy into Canada.
The plutonium, now you'll correct me if I'm wrong, our current CANDU systems don't produce the material required for nuclear weapons. So where would we get that stuff?
They're having a conversation
about
this. Well, so
in this case, at least, the idea would be to use byproduct of the uranium that we use in other systems, or and this is where we get into the hypothetical, and it depends on where we are and what the international situation is. Canada could buy, for example, some of the material, but what I want to stress here is doing something. So this proposal goes counter to our current international commitment right through the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the idea here was born out of two things, right? So one being necessity, if we ever are in a position that we need it, but more importantly, there seems to be a window of opportunity opening internationally. And when I say window of opportunity, I don't necessarily mean something positive. I mean, there's a drive for the acquisition of nuclear weapons in the world at the moment, right? And we've all seen the headlines. Poland is looking, at the moment, they're looking as to seeing if they could base French nuclear weapons in their territory. Whether they're going to stay there is an open question.
That's because Poland is sick of being next up. Every time one of these nations around them decides to fight it out, the question always comes up, is Poland next? This entire war between Ukraine and Russia, you've been hearing that if Ukraine falls, Poland's next. That has to drive anxiety out the roof. So is anyone really surprised to hear that they might want a couple hundred deterrents under their belt?
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Now top that off with the fact that NATO's already having to issue statements, where the NATO leader had to warn Russia to expect a devastating reaction if it ever attacks Poland. So they're understanding that this is a very different world that we live in currently.
Well, I sure fucking hope so.
At the moment, right? And we've all seen the headlines. Poland is looking, at the moment, they're looking as to seeing if they could base French nuclear weapons in their territory. Whether they're going to stay there is an open question. Germany had talks about doing the same. Are they going to continue to talk about nuclearization? Now, South Korea, on the other hand, is talking about outright nuclearization. So what does it mean for the Non-Proliferation Treaty? What does it mean for these commitments? And is NATO as an alliance, for example, going to rethinking, or at least are the European allies going to be rethinking their stance on non-proliferation? If that happens, well, how does Canada position, how does Canada position itself in that discussion? Because we don't have the options that the Europeans have. I don't think it's credible to ask the UK and France for what we call extended nuclear deterrence, right? The nuclear umbrella. First, because the UK have a program that is coupled with the Americans. France has an independent force, but you and I can agree of what we would expect as kind of a reaction.
No, the easy answer, build your own.
If Canada bases French nuclear weapons on its territory, like, it's a ludicrous idea. So therefore, Canada in this case would be left to its own design to make it work. And when we look at what's going on at the moment, Europe is busy, right? So if we think about a conflict, let's say the future in the Arctic or something like this, or if God forbid, and there was another excellent piece in the Globe and Mail this weekend making scenarios in case of what's happening when the Americans actually escalate. And I want to stress, it's scenario based. Am I saying that the probabilities that it's going to happen? No. Is it going to happen tomorrow morning? No. But we're in a world now that we actually need to look at the actual chance that something like this happen. If this happened, well, then becomes a little bit unclear what happens. But and even then, the main threat being the Russian in the Arctic. But what would happen to Canadian security given that the European are bogged down in Europe? Their capabilities are not are like ours, like depleted, and everybody's trying to rearm. So Canada is a bit. There's a question of are we going to go it alone, and so on and so forth. So the whole piece is.
There is another scenario to consider. What happens if the Americans get in trouble? They need Canadian assistance militarily. Canadians, at the very least, need to be able to provide some cover. This isn't just scenarios of Canada versus US.
You don't turn your back on family.
In short, you need to be able to hold your own. You have to be reliable militarily.
Are like ours, like depleted, and everybody's trying to rearm. So Canada is a bit. There's a question of are we going to go it alone, and so on and so forth. So the whole piece is inscribed within this kind of broader, larger hypothetical of where we're going.
Should we keep it simple and just have small atomic bombs, or should we think about going all the way and actually developing hydrogen weapons?
Yeah, I knew that question was going to come up at some point. Now, there are some excellent videos out there to give you a proper understanding of scaling. But when he says, should we build a bunch of little ones, you're usually talking about one of the first three. When you start thinking about the bigger ones, that's a different, well, look for yourself.
Castle Bravo is important in the escalation of global concern and protest over nuclear testing, regardless of where it was happening, because everything at Castle Bravo is happening on a scale that is exponentially larger because these are hydrogen bombs. The scale of these explosions is gigantic, and the unanticipated consequences were much bigger than anything that had happened before.
The top of the fireball at this time, 40 seconds after detonation, was 5 miles above sea level.
And so now we get back to the conversation that they were having.
Should we keep it simple and just have small atomic bombs, or should we think about going all the way and actually developing hydrogen weapons?
So I think at the moment, I don't think we're there. I think at the moment, what we need to look at is to shore up the credibility of how we would hypothetically deliver these weapons. So it means that we need to then place emphasis on weapon systems that could actually develop them. So we're at the moment looking into our own satellite launching technology, right? This is a good idea, mostly because the systems that you use to send rockets in space are the same system that you get if you develop missiles. We need to look into, in my humble opinion, into submarines that are able to deliver nuclear capabilities, even absent Canada having a nuclear capability. And we need to look into air weapon systems. In the piece I talk about probably moving away from the F-35, given that they're American made. But then the problem again there is that the available options are limited. The Rafale is back order. It's going to, like, France has a hard time dealing with demand, and the Gripen has an American engine. But still, it's a question to be asking. But if we move to a different kind of plane, well, they would need to be nuclear capable. And this will bring us to kind of this line of nuclear latency, where we will have first, well, systems that can actually enhance our defense today. And I think it's in line with what we're seeing into what Prime Minister Carney is talking about. There's in the release, there's a lot of uncertainty. We talk about giving the Navy new submarine capabilities, but you'll notice there's nothing assigned to it, and they're not saying that we're going to continue on the path that we are continuing now. So does this mean that we're evaluating weapon systems like a nuclear-powered submarine? Maybe. I'm not putting words into the premiers, but that's something like that is doable. But all of this to say that this bring us to kind of a line where if we need to develop and if we need to push into an independent force, well, then we will already have the means to deliver the weapon, making deterrence. And when I say deliver the weapon, I want to be very clear. The idea about with nuclear weapons is not to use them, is that the threat of the possibility of using them provide you a level of security, but that usually is credible when it comes to defending your territorial integrity. Nobody wants to see nuclear weapons used. They're made as what we call deterrents, right?
It's obviously a good thing that he prefaced that one out. No one wants to use it, but also you want to make sure you have it just in case, worst case scenario, you need it.
Trust, I keep that thing on me. You feel me? What you get? I keep it on me though, double major.
I wonder if the Canadian establishment will have the courage to actually tell America, no, we don't want the F-35, because that would be such a slap in the face for the American military-industrial complex. Do you think the federal government will have the courage to do that?
I think they may, but it will depend on the international context. I believe that we will get the delivery, and I forget the numbers. I believe it's 16, but please don't hold me up to it. The first leg of the contract, I don't believe that we're going to shred this. I think that we're going to purchase those that are paid for, that we're expected to get, and so on. After that, well, then it depends how our allies are moving. Portugal, for example, is talking about scraping them, and other countries are talking internally about scraping their contracts. If we start to see a cascade, I don't expect Canada to be the first one to do it, mostly because strategically you want to hedge your bet. But I think depending on the next, and I'm not talking the next year or so, I'm talking in the near future, there might be political will to do this, because realistically, there's a lot of opinion pieces being released at the moment stressing Canadian security. I think we're in a moment where Canadians are now more than ever, probably the last time that Canadians were as tuned in to our security needs was likely World War II, or maybe the Korean War, right? But we're talking far back. So I think we might be in the moment where something like this is possible.
It really doesn't help the fact that when Trump says he's going to sell you a toned-down version of a fighter jet,
buy them also, and certain allies will be selling them, perhaps toned-down versions. We like to tone them down about 10%, which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, right?
Oh, for Pete's sake.
I'm sorry, but that doesn't really help anyone scramble to the front of the line to buy your equipment. This is the art of the deal, and then ending it with maybe one day they're not our allies. You hear that, and it makes this.
Should we keep it simple and just have small atomic bombs, or should we think about going all the way and actually developing hydrogen weapons?
Make a lot more sense. So that was the gist of their conversation. I just wanted to go over that one with y'all. So what do you think? Is it time for Canada to really step up and become one of the world's nuclear powerhouses? Or no, should they try to continue to keep the peace, even in the midst of a potentially hostile nation right underneath their nose? That's all I got for now. Whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comment section. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like, and I will see you again on the next one. Be easy, y'all.